everybody. Jenny Whitener here from Bridge Innovate. So lovely to see faces and names come up that I haven't seen in a while. So welcome everyone. Today we're happy to have you join us on Welcome to Leaders in the Arena. Here at Bridge Innovate, we are a global network of business strategists, consultants, and designers that team up with you to spark distinctive change for your organization. Today, we're excited to have you with us for our webinar and podcast series to talk about some valuable insights and lessons around the implementation of nonprofit strategies. And we have today with us a very special guest that is joining us here at Bridge Innovate. We've had an opportunity to work with a number of great nonprofits across the community and strategic planning and implementing strategic planning. And we're thankful for all of our nonprofit clients. So many of you are here today, and some are just joining to learn more about us. So thank you for being here. Today, we have a very special guest with us, Rachel Gammon, who's recently joined us as a principal consultant of our nonprofit strategy practice here at Bridge Innovate. And we are thrilled that she's here to share some experience. As you know, many of you know Rachel, she brings over 25 years of experience in the local nonprofit sector through her time at serving as the executive director for the Northside Neighborhood House. And in various leadership roles there, she's been recognized time and time again, whether it's Nonprofit Executive of the Year or having received Nonprofit of the Year twice in the Chattanooga area. So certainly recognized for the outstanding leadership and the accomplishments that have been achieved under her helm at the Northside Neighborhood House. We are excited that she's bringing all of that knowledge and capability to the consulting world now to team up with other leaders across the nonprofit sector to enable them to do all the great things that they are challenged to do every day. So welcome, Rachel.
Thanks so much, Jenny. I'm excited to be here and excited to just share some of our experiences that we've had with Bridge and just through our strategic planning processes. And hopefully we'll learn together today.
Great. So as we get going, I know that a number of you on our next slide have worked with us in strategic planning. And when we do strategic planning design, many times what we include in our proposals is a launch session. So at least if we're not engaged with you for the full implementation, we do tend to set up an agenda with you in a sample like this where we say, okay, let's talk about the vision you've designed. Let's talk about your strategy. What is your leadership launch plan and your leadership structure? So Rachel, as we go into the first session for today, talk to us a little bit about those things that are important. What steps can leaders take to ensure that their strategic plans that they design are really translated into specific actionable initiatives?
Yeah, so there are a few elements that we always focus on when we're working with our clients and also that have been successful in our launches at the Northside Neighborhood House. So one is just leadership structure. So once we have the strategic plan laid out with the initiatives, we really have to be intentional about who has ownership of each piece of the puzzle, whether that be staff, board, and or both. And so being sure that each of the tactics and KPIs are tied back to someone who is constantly thinking about that. Another thing that's really necessary and has been so helpful about using Bridge as a consultant for us at the Neighborhood House has been just being very intentional about what that implementation plan looks like. So being sure, as I said earlier, that KPIs, tactics, and then working as a team to assign action items to be sure that we meet those deliverables is very important. Cadence is important. My first 4 years of leading, we had a strategic plan that we came together. I was so excited about, and it literally sat on a shelf. And it wasn't until I worked with Bridge Innovate that we talked about from the beginning, what does that cadence look like of how frequently are we going to be looking at the initiatives? How frequently are we going to be doing check-ins? So within our weekly leadership meeting check-ins, there's always a place for any updates that we need about the strategic plan. And board engagement being a part of it, we talk with our board every month. We have a slide deck that has each of the strategic initiatives and action items that have been made towards achieving the goals that are related to each initiative. Now, at the neighborhood house, we're a big group of overachievers. So I've had to really lean into my team and say, you do not have to have something every month that you've been doing towards those strategic initiatives, because we have this business as usual that we have to take care of as well. And I think that goes back to like that management cadence, and what we can talk through and coach you and your team with is, and we actually had Jenny do a follow-up to our last strategic plan, just focused on, we've got some really big, bold strategic initiatives, but I really wanted her to lean in with our team and talk about, how do we make sure that we have this perfect balance of the business as usual? What are those key, we've got to keep people housed. We have to be sure that our kids have a safe space in our community schools. So how are we going to maintain this level of excellence with the programming that we're already doing while managing those strategic initiatives? And again, having those implementation plans, the management cadence kind of established at the beginning has helped us to be very successful in implementing all of our plans.
And I know that along the way, Rachel, that you were really, one of the most important things that you had was involving your board. So when you think about those tips for implementation, what are some of the techniques that you use to create this collaboration? Because it really was the bringing in of that leadership structure that you have just as a board, working with your team, that made the work effort feasible and really brought it all together.
Right. I think one of the challenges for nonprofits, and I shared our board committee meeting structure, but one of the challenges, and again, we're committed to continuous improvement at the neighborhood house. So we just shifted to this after our last strategic plan with Jenny, and she gave us this tool as this would be a good way to look at the business. But I think sometimes we take our board members for granted, not for granted, but we just don't use them as effectively as we could. And so creating this structure where we have, what are our overarching goals for what this committee happened to be our executive committee. So there are some standard things that we needed to be sure that we got done as a committee. These were the strategic planning goals for year, I think this was year one for one of our last initiatives. And so these were the goals that we wanted to be sure we achieved. And then what we did each month was, I met first with our committee lead to be sure that we went over all of the things that I was asking from the board, and was I missing anything? And we, again, to be sure that we had time to discuss and I could utilize their skill sets to the best of my ability. General updates I just had typed in there. Things that they needed to know, I just had that typed in. I don't need to talk to you about that. You can read it. Business as usual topics for discussion. If there were things that had to do with our general operations, those were placed in there. And then we had assigned time just to look at our strategic planning topics. So for month one of the questions I had with our board was, who do you know in the community who might be interested in helping us fund this community strategist position? And so that was really important, that I was constantly bringing to the forefront of my board who have connections and also experience in the for-profit sector, their experience to plug in to be sure we could work towards our initiatives. So that was a key element. That's been a key element. And then again, because we're doing that within our committee meetings to the larger board, and I didn't put a slide in here about it, but for the larger board, we had each of those key initiatives and those updates. And one of the things and structures that we have just gotten from Bridge through the coaching around the management is looking at, where are our gaps? So every month we bring to our board, here are gaps that we have that we might have talked about in this strategic initiative that was around having a client-centered service model. But my executive committee didn't talk about that. They were talking about this initiative around having a community impact strategist. So being sure that even though they might have not been in these detailed meetings, they're still getting a glimpse into this is a gap that we have when we're working towards these initiatives, and this is how you can fill in. And so that's been really effective, and just again keeping everyone informed and engaged. Another thing that we've done as far as being sure that there was a collaborative team culture is that quarterly I pull the team members who are working on the strategic plan in, and we look at, okay, what did we achieve this quarter? How does that align with what we're trying to do for the entire year? That allows for my team members to hear from each other and what they're working on, and then lean into, oh, our chief development officer needs a little help here. And so if someone else has some time, they're folding in that time or support to ensure that we get to all of those goals for that year.
Amazing amount of great insight here. So we've covered some pretty big categories around kind of the implementation elements and this collaborative structure. I want to just open it up. We have a small group joining with us live today. And if anybody would like to come off of mute and ask a question, or if you have a question you want to put in the chat and you want me to ask Rachel for you, please do so before we go on to our next segment. Any questions about these elements and implementation or board engagement? Okay, well, let's keep going. So the other things that we want to talk about in terms of implementation, and I know, Rachel, you know I've talked about this before, is when we talk about implementing strategy, it's really about implementing change. Mm-hmm. And so how does a leader really help their organization evolve from the planning process of strategy to being ready for change and ensuring that they're staying flexible and responsive to the changing needs of the community? How do you bring that change mindset to the table?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that has helped us is just the entire strategic planning process that we use at Bridge, because we're constantly from the beginning, we're looking at what are our clients' needs. We're doing scans about what's going on in the community. We're really, we're dreaming big and being bold. So we're kind of putting a lot of general ideas out on the table. And I think that what that allows us to do as leaders in the process, whether it be staff or board, is really see there are all types of opportunities out there. And so really encouraging everyone that, okay, we're committed to making change a part of who we are, because we know continuous improvement, the needs of our community are always changing. So we've got to be committed to that continuous improvement. And then I think what starts to happen is that just becomes kind of our mindset. I've read, being afraid to fail keeps you from successes, right? Like being afraid to, if I struck out, for instance, on our previous strategic plan, what was popular at the time were some of these mobile services. At the time, we had GED classes that we were doing. And we had some different services through our stability outreaches. And so we thought, some people aren't getting to us. Do we need to have, there were mobile vans that had become like kind of the go-to. And this was our previous strategic plan. So this is about 10 years ago. So we had one of our strategic initiatives was mobile services. And we had created this year 1 through 5 strategy to get to having these mobile services. Well, right as we're in the midst of, okay, we might need to change and look at how we do service delivery a little bit differently. And we were going in this direction of using mobile vans. The community school model came to our doorstep. So the community school model allows for the neighborhood house to have a person present in each school community. So slight shift in how we had planned on executing that strategic initiative. But again, we were ready and willing and able to make that shift and recognize, okay, we had this initial thought, the plan has shifted slightly, but we're still going to address the needs of people in our community, have access to people in different community and different locales. And so it was just I think what a huge part of it is just being sure that you know and you recognize that while change can be difficult, for us as deliverers of services to our community, it can be difficult for the people that we serve when we change the way we deliver services. If we're working towards ultimately being more efficient and more effective, that's what our customer base needs. And that's what the people that we're serving need.
And so I love this. I love how you were taking that kind of design mindset and the change leadership mindset and holding that throughout the implementation of the strategy so that as you started to mobilize, when the community school effort came into play, you're like, we need to really dig into this, lean into this, and pivot where it makes sense and not feel that that transition was a failure, but that transition was a winning play, right? So making that change, making that shift as you learn and grow is a very positive thing to do as you're learning more about what's happening as you're implementing your strategy. Well said. Let's go on and talk a little bit about one of the tools that we're going to be sending out to our participants today is this force field analysis. Talk a little bit about how you use something like this to understand like what's going on in your community so that when you're implementing your strategy, you're seeing like what's driving you towards the change that you've identified in your strategy, what's keeping you, what's restraining you, both on the rational, emotional side, so that we take this into account, right?
Right. And so I think that what we're doing, again, with using this design thinking process is taking the services that we provide and just looking at them more intentionally than just we've got to provide XYZ services to the community. It's really on the front end looking at what are we doing again well, what's in, and breaking that down and putting that data into that rational piece. What are the things that we know we're doing well? What else do we know is happening? What is happening in the context of the world that we're living in and the communities that we're living in? And then looking at what might be out there that's going to hinder our progress and going ahead and addressing that on the front end prevents us from that being a major stumbling block when we come to it throughout implementation. And so again, just thinking through each of those initiatives and what might be a barrier on the front end. If we go ahead and identify that and talk through what are ways that we might work around that, that helps us to be more successful on the back end of the problem, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think one of the things I like about this kind of tool is it gives you that rational, as you're saying, what's a fact that's either driving us or restraining us from getting there. But there's also this emotional side that many times can be just as powerful. Things like fear, things of like, I'm unsure of where this is headed, or I'm not feeling confident. And so how do we also, like you said, proactively identifying those that might be affected by the strategy change or might be their roles might be affected, so that they feel confident that we spend a little bit more time communicating with them or getting their emotional buy-in to why the change is important, why the strategy shift is important for our overall mission and objective. And I think that just helps put it into like a way that you can work it, like a work plan almost,
Right. And I think, Jenny, I mean, I'm speaking to a group of my peers. So I know some of you are thinking, I don't have the time to sit down and work through this with everything else that I'm trying to manage. But again, as we have this shift of how we approach doing our business, and especially how we approach implementing strategic plans, if we do the intentional thought on the front end of the process, then it helps the overall process to move so much more smoothly. And so I think that is part of that, going back to that first slide that just talked about management. If we go ahead and set this up as a way and a structure, we know we're going to take some of that time at the beginning to just, how are we going to approach problems? And this is a part of it, is going through that change rationale, like structure that helps us to achieve that long-term goal.
Right. Good. Now, one of the other questions that we wanted to talk about today in our session was that when you've completed your strategic plan, and you're wanting to take some of the elements of that and push it into the marketing, sort of really help to educate the community about this is where we're headed, this is our strategy, here's how it relates to our mission. Talk about how you share that progress. Um,
Yeah, sure. Well, the first thing that we do, and I didn't share that today, but the first thing is Bridge is great about, we will send a follow-up document that kind of summarizes the initiatives. As we talk about the scope of work, if that's something that you're interested in, and they've always developed that for us. So each page of that has a strategic initiative that, like, we know we're working on this. These are the tactics that we're going to get there. They kind of pretty up this, right? So these are 6 strategic initiatives that we have for a client that we're working with, and they would have it in a sharp looking document. And then what we do is we monetize that. If there are things that we know, if there's an initiative that we know that is going to have to take additional funding, that isn't just changing a little bit about how we're doing service delivery, we go ahead and monetize that on the front end, because what that allows us to do is, you guys have all written grants. Many of them say, what are your strategic initiatives? It's a clean, clear, concise document that's saying this is what we're working towards, that also has monetized any kind of investments that, as you're taking it to donors, they can use. And then if you'll go back to the previous slide, then what we do as part of our annual report out to the community, and this was our report for this year because we've kind of gotten to our vision for 2026 a little quicker than we thought we were, just through using some of these tactics and strategies. But we have this each time, and we have, okay, these are the different initiatives. These are 3 of the initiatives that we were working on for the vision for 2026 at the neighborhood house. And we just had a little check mark next to each box. And so as we worked through our strategic plan over this has been our plan that we started on about 3 years ago. Each year when we did our annual report to the community, we would just say, okay, here's our vision for 2026. Here are the initiatives that are going to get us there. And we just check them as we accomplish them. And again, that just allows us to communicate to our donors, to our investors, to the community, we're doing this work, we're being very intentional about it, and we're getting the work done. And so our funders have loved to see that, because again, it sees we're setting clear, actionable goals, we're working towards them, and we're having success in them. So it's a great talking piece as we're going out, and it's also a great motivator for us as well. Internally, again, we're doing those quarterly and annual check-ins to just say, here's where we are. And that's so important, to celebrate those wins with your team as you progress through an initiative.
And I think, Rachel, what you're talking about is so important, because you're taking a strategy document and then working it in that management cadence with your team, getting that progress, but then pushing it to your website, where you're showing kind of maybe in a simplified format how you're progressing, keeping your community informed and updated about your progress, so that they can also celebrate and be excited about where you're headed. And it also recognizes your team, right? The members of your team that are helping to push through and achieve those things every day. So I love how you have taken that communication effort and really amplified it throughout, so that it shows recognition, it shows progress, in all the different phases. The last spot that I wanted to talk with you about today is kind of like measurement of success. Like, I know we hear this all the time. Where's the data? Where's the data? But can you talk a bit more about how you bring KPIs and measurement into the strategy implementation process?
Yes, I mean, and this is what, again, I love about working with a consultant who's done this for so long. We set up some very similar to this plan from one of our clients, some clear KPIs and tactics on the front end. And so that document that we have at the neighborhood house, again, it doesn't just sit on a shelf. We're pulling it down. We're looking at these. This is what we said we were going to achieve. Where are we? What do we need to do? Here's one of those keys to going back to the change management. What changes do we need to make to ensure that we achieve these KPIs? what action items do we need to be sure that we're implementing to be sure that we're getting to those tactics and achieving those. So it's all built out to just to work together and be a constant source of information and kind of a checks and balance is what we have found to be very effective. I think using a tool like this helps it to all be centralized. And that's really important. And those are all really keys. I think another thing is just ensuring, and this is an intangible thing, but ensuring that your staff stays engaged through the process. So I can't elevate enough how important it is. As I shared, it's part of our weekly check-ins with our leadership team to go back to the strategic plan. So as we have those wins, we're celebrating them, because this can always or oftentimes be like very tireless work, and you feel like, where are we getting, what are we achieving here? And so those constant reminders of, yes, we're on course, we're on track to achieve success in these initiatives is really important.
And I think, Rachel, one of the things that I saw that you did is that when earlier you talked about the management cadence, getting your team involved in implementing the strategy, getting your board involved in implementing the strategy. These key performance indicators that go with your goals, give them kind of a benchmark. Are we progressing? Are we making the progress that we said we would make? And by putting that front and center with both the board and the staff and meeting with them regularly on that, they're seeing their progress, or they're seeing where they're having problems. And then you can address that, like, let's brainstorm around that. Or if we're hitting a barrier, how do we overcome that barrier? Do we need to make a pivot? What's the solution here? And so I think it helps to quantify your progress and then see where you need to work together to resolve an issue that might be in your way.
Yeah, absolutely. And Martha, that's a great comment. Yeah, you can find a lot of these in Excel and other data. Like, I think you can find examples of this. Another thing that we do at Bridge is we'll do a high level like this, and then sometimes for the Northside Neighborhood House, we broke it down into year 1, year 2, and year 3 through 5, because then that again just breaks it down even more where it's manageable to achieve those goals.
And we're seeing a lot of our clients now use tools like Asana or Monday.com or Trello. And there are free versions of these work management tools that you can invite your entire team to, that are very transparent. Everybody sees all the activities going on. You can set it up even as what we call business as usual activities and the strategic plan implementation activities. So there are all kinds of tools to help you do that. As we wrap up today, I just want to kind of reinforce, if you have questions for Rachel today, please feel free to post those in the chat. I'll bring them to her. But as we kind of wrap up today, one of the things that Rachel and I wanted to make sure that we shared with you in implementation on the next slide is just a little bit about the fact that implementing strategy is implementing change. And when we think about that and we become aware as leaders what that means, we go back to the research, right? And so this is from Kubler-Ross. They have a lot of leading research on change, and a lot of their early research was actually around grief. But it works in the organizational setting, and that many times, depending on how dramatic your strategy is, you'll see people go through this Kubler-Ross change curve where they'll go, oh my gosh, I'm in shock, I'm in denial, are we really going to do this? And then they may go through the anger stage or bargaining, like, do we really have to implement these changes right now? Can we wait another year? Or could I only do half of these changes? They'll start bargaining with you. And before they actually sometimes go through a little bit of depression, gosh, we are going to change. And then hopefully get to acceptance, right? And the acceptance is, I'm ready to go, I'm bought in. Now, some people can go through this in a matter of an hour. They go through, generally the research shows, so we all go through this, whether you're moving cities, changing jobs, or implementing a strategic plan. But sometimes people, it takes quite a bit of time to go through this, and they need help. And so I think, Rachel, one of the things I just wanted to share with people today is that, remember, change is human. And implementing strategy, usually that means the board might be changing their roles, staff might be changing roles, and we have to remember that. And then I think the last thing as we then opened it up for questions is that at Bridge, we have a full range of change implementation support systems that we can help you with that go broad, even beyond just launch planning. On the next slide, we look at things like, do we want to organize the change in terms of sprints, doing some prototype and testing? Do we need to build some things that are part of your new design with your strategy? Do we need to deploy them? So there are many different things that we can do along the way. Well, and the last slide, I want to just again thank you for joining us for Leaders in the Arena. Rachel will be and Luke will be sending out materials from today's call, along with our sample tool, that force field analysis that you can use on your own with your work. And I know, Rachel, you'll be following up. So thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us today.
Yes, thanks so much for having me. Good to see everyone.
And our next session is coming up, Deliberate Calm, an overview of that wonderful book by Carleen Blanding. Carleen is a vice president at Shaw Industries and also serves on our executive and residence team. So some great insights that come in a time of turbulence that we're all facing from this wonderful book, Deliberate Calm. If you have 30 minutes to join us, please dial in again or listen to it at any of the places that you find your podcast work. Thanks for joining us today. See you soon.